I sat at the edge of the dining room, folding linen napkins I'd ironed for her bridal shower, as my daughter laughed in the hallway. "She's a burden," she whispered. "I can't wait until she's out of the way." The chandelier above us sparkled like it approved. She didn't know the will had already been signed. She didn't know the next time she asked what was mine, the answer would be nothing. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The floral scent hit Eleanor the moment she stepped into the Westbridge Garden Society clubhouse. A heady mix of peonies, roses, and something citrusy that reminded her of weddings she hadn't wanted to attend. Polite chatter and clinking wine glasses floated from the sunroom ahead, where Kimberly's laugh rang out sharp and high like a champagne flute cracking. Eleanor paused in the hallway, her hand brushing the delicate magnolia wallpaper. The voices hadn't noticed her yet. She didn't move. "She's exhausting," Kimberly said, and Eleanor could hear the smirk without seeing it. "I can't wait until I can finally be rid of her." There was a pause, then the soft pop of a cork. "You'll get the house, right?" someone asked, a woman, young, probably blonde. Eleanor could almost picture her, the kind who married lawyers straight out of sorority houses. Kimberly didn't miss a beat. "Obviously," she said, voice low and sweet with venom. "I've earned that much." Eleanor didn't step forward, didn't call out or make a scene. Her hand slipped from the wallpaper like a leaf losing its grip on a branch. She backed away, heels silent on the worn hardwood, leaving the laughter and lilacs behind. Outside, the sky was doing that strange late autumn thing, gray clouds tugging at the last threads of sun. Eleanor walked quickly past the rose trellises and manicured hedges, until the sound of chatter was just wind. She drove home with the windows up and the radio off, one hand tight on the steering wheel, the other twisting the ring on her finger like it was threaded to her thoughts. Kimberly's voice played again and again. "She's exhausting. I can't wait until I can finally be rid of her." The worst part wasn't the words. It was how casual they'd sounded, like Kimberly had said them before. At home, the house was too quiet, the kind of silence that echoed off the walls and came back heavy. Eleanor walked through the rooms like a ghost, trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. In the kitchen, Irene stood barefoot at the counter, slicing pears. Her silver hair was pinned up messily, her apron dusted with flour. The smell of cinnamon was thick in the air. "You look like you swallowed a storm cloud," Irene said, not looking up. Eleanor blinked. "Do I?" "You do." She opened her mouth, then closed it. What was there to say? That the woman she'd opened her home to, her husband's daughter from a marriage long buried, had just confessed her plan to take everything and leave her with nothing. That the betrayal hadn't come like a knife, but a whisper? "Garden Club was enlightening," Eleanor said finally, reaching for a towel to dry her palms. They were sweating and cold. Irene set the knife down and turned to face her. "She did something." "She said something," Eleanor corrected. Irene's eyes narrowed. Eleanor leaned back against the counter, staring at the tiles like they might shift and spell it out for her. "She wants the house." "She won't get it," Irene said simply. Eleanor almost laughed. "She already thinks it's hers." There was a beat of silence. The wind outside rattled the shutters, and somewhere upstairs, something creaked. "You should talk to George," Irene said. "Tell him what you heard." Eleanor shook her head. "I don't want to make it a war." Irene raised an eyebrow. "Honey, it already is." That night, Eleanor stood by the window, watching the wind pull leaves from the trees like secrets being stripped bare. The house behind her was quiet again, but not empty. Kimberly was home, somewhere upstairs, her door closed. Probably messaging her friends. Probably telling them what a martyr she was for putting up with the woman she called family. Eleanor sipped from a glass of Cabernet, bitter on her tongue, and wondered how long the girl had been planning this. Was it always about the house, about George's money, about erasing her? She didn't cry, didn't scream, just stared out the window like she was memorizing the shape of the garden. The slope of the lawn, everything Kimberly would never get. Then she turned away, and went to find the one box she hadn't opened in years. The attic dust still clung to Eleanor's sleeves as she sat at her writing desk, the manila envelope from the box resting beside a half-empty glass of Cabernet. The edges were worn, the flap unsealed. She didn't need to open it to know what it contained. She remembered every word, every signature, but she opened it anyway. First came the will. Heavy stock paper with the seal of Jennings and Ashcroft pressed into the corner like a final stamp of authority. Paul Jennings had insisted on it. Something official looking, something that couldn't be mistaken for a draft or a wish. Final. Legal. Immutable. She skimmed the paragraphs, though she knew them by heart. Her assets, real estate, investments, heirlooms, all distributed. Carefully, intentionally. Kimberly's name appeared nowhere. It had once, briefly, before the tantrums, before the cutting remarks disguised as dry wit, before Eleanor had to explain to her own husband why she'd left the dinner table early 3 nights in a row. But those days were gone. Harper's name was everywhere now. Executor, beneficiary, trustee. Eleanor set the will aside. The living trust came next. That had been Paul's idea too. Avoid probate. Keep it private, he'd said. It made sense. Everything titled properly. Bank accounts, the house, even the old lake cabin in Vermont. The one she hadn't visited in over a decade, but still paid taxes on. Harper again, in every line, every clause. Not Kimberly. The power of attorney forms followed. One for finances, one for health care. Harper had signed them solemnly in Paul's office, glancing at Eleanor like she wasn't sure if this meant her aunt was dying or just done being disappointed. I'm not planning to go anywhere, Eleanor had told her then. But if I do, I'd rather it be your voice they hear. That had been months ago, before the final fracture, before the garden club mixer, where Eleanor had heard Kimberly say the quiet part out loud. Now, reading the ink again, Eleanor felt nothing but certainty. Irene appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of chamomile tea and a raised eyebrow. Still up here with your ghosts? Just filing memories, Eleanor said, without looking up. The kind you can take to court? Eleanor cracked a small smile. Exactly. Irene set a mug down and leaned over the desk, eyes sweeping across the headers. Will, trust, POA. You really cleaned house. I had Paul finalize it in August, Eleanor said. After that scene Kimberly made at the garden dinner, remember that passive-aggressive toast about earning love in this house? Irene snorted. Oh, I remember. She was 2 sips away from throwing the wine in your face. She thought George would always clean up her messes. He won't, Irene said flatly. No, Eleanor agreed. He won't. There was a pause. Then Irene spoke more softly. She burned the bridge. You just never told her it collapsed. Eleanor looked up, eyes tired but steady. Why warn someone who already lit the match? They sat in silence for a few moments, the sound of the wind brushing against the windows. Somewhere outside, a branch scraped against the roof, like winter trying to claw its way inside. You think she'll find out soon? Irene asked. Eventually, Eleanor replied, collecting the papers into a neat stack. But that's not my concern anymore. You're not going to tell her. No, let her discover it when it matters. When she thinks it's hers, and the world tells her it isn't. Poetic, Irene said, and a little brutal. She's the one who mistook silence for weakness. Eleanor placed the documents back into the envelope, sealed it, and slid it into the drawer of her desk, not hidden, not flaunted. Just there, quietly waiting. The air in the room felt lighter now, like the ceiling had lifted. There was no thrill in what she'd done, no rush of revenge, just relief, the kind that comes from no longer pretending something broken could be fixed. Down the hall, she heard the distant thud of a door. Kimberly. Probably raiding the fridge or sending a snide text about Eleanor's mood swings. Let her. Because the future Kimberly thought she had, it didn't exist. And Eleanor didn't need to fight for something she already owned. The Birch and Bone was already humming when Eleanor arrived. Cerussed oak tables, vases of fresh eucalyptus, and the soft hum of jazz spilling from hidden speakers. A server in black denim offered her a smile and a water with lemon before she'd even unbuttoned her coat. She chose a corner table with a view of the door. Harper arrived first, 5 minutes early as always. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well, but managed a half smile as she slid into the booth. "Morning," she said, tugging her sweater sleeves down. "You didn't have to come," Eleanor murmured, sipping her water. "I know. But you shouldn't have to sit through this alone." Eleanor reached over and touched Harper's hand. No words, just the kind of gesture that didn't need explaining. Not anymore. Kimberly showed up 17 minutes late. Big sunglasses, bigger smile, leather boots that clicked too hard on the polished concrete. Her coat was draped fashionably over one shoulder, and her lipstick matched the cranberry syrup on the seasonal menu. "Ladies," she sang, sliding in next to Harper. "Sorry, traffic was a nightmare. You'd think everyone in this town just lives for brunch." "Most people show up for it," Eleanor said evenly, not looking up from her napkin. Kimberly ignored that, or pretended to. "This place is cute. Rustic chic meets overpriced toast." She reached for the carafe of coffee, poured herself a cup, and leaned back like she owned the booth. Eleanor didn't speak, just studied her. The performance, the public charm. The empty seat between her and Harper that felt like a fault line. When the server came, Kimberly ordered a citrus salad she'd never finish and a side of bacon she'd criticize. Harper asked for pancakes. Eleanor got black coffee and poached eggs. The silence between ordering and arrival was filled with Kimberly's curated small talk. How the neighborhood was starting to look tired, how George had been a little off lately, and how some people should really consider downsizing before it became someone else's problem. Then she smiled, sweet, like a serpent under silk. "You know, Eleanor, we really need to get you into assisted living soon. It's time." Harper flinched. Eleanor didn't. She laid her napkin in her lap with the same care she used folding linens for guests she didn't like. "Good to know where you stand," she said calmly. Kimberly gave a tinkling laugh. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. I was joking." "You weren't," Eleanor replied, eyes sharp but voice soft. "And that's the thing," Kimberly blinked, then smiled again. A little tighter this time. "Well, it's just, Dad worries. You get tired easily, the stairs. And you've said yourself that the house feels big lately." "I said it felt quiet," Eleanor said. "Not that it wasn't mine." That silenced Kimberly long enough for the food to arrive. The rest of the meal passed like winter sunlight, cold and brittle, bright enough to see the cracks. Kimberly made conversation like she was trying to win a game no one else had agreed to play. Harper stayed quiet, pushing syrup around her plate. Her eyes darted between them like she was hoping one would throw a napkin over a grenade before it went off. Eleanor didn't bite. She ate slowly, precisely. She listened. She watched. By the time the server returned with the check, Kimberly was reapplying lipstick and checking her phone, already half turned toward the door. "I'll get this," Eleanor said, sliding her card into the leather folio before either of them could protest. "You sure?" Kimberly asked, tone mocking beneath the courtesy. "I know the retirement budget's tight." Eleanor didn't answer. When the folio came back, she opened it, signed cleanly, and pulled exactly 20% in cash from her wallet. Not a dollar more. Then she stood. No speech, no final jab. No closing words to hang in the air. Just her coat, her keys, her quiet. Harper stood too, hesitating. "Do you want me to?" "No, sweetheart," Eleanor said, brushing her hand. "Stay. Finish your coffee." Kimberly didn't even look up from her phone. Outside, the cold snapped at Eleanor's cheeks like little truths slapping skin. Her breath hung in the air in soft white threads. She walked to her car, slid inside, and sat with her hands on the wheel. The heater hummed to life slowly, but the anger burned hotter. Not rage, not yet. Just the heavy, focused kind, the type that calcifies into resolve. She pulled out her phone and opened her email. Inbox, drafts, sent folder. There it was. The file Paul had sent her. Final notice of beneficiary designation. She forwarded it. One address. KimberlyDentonEggmail.com. No subject line, no message, no explanation. Just a legal truth that couldn't be softened with charm or cruelty. Then she turned the key in the ignition and drove home like nothing had changed, even though everything had. It was well past sunset when Harper arrived at the house, her old Subaru crunching softly over the gravel drive. She parked behind Eleanor's Buick, headlights sweeping briefly across the hedges before fading into the evening fog. Eleanor was already waiting at the kitchen table. The room was warm, lit only by the under-cabinet lights and a single flickering taper candle. A casserole dish sat untouched in the center, still covered in foil. The kind of meal you made when you needed something to do with your hands. Harper dropped her bag by the back door and slid into the chair across from her. She didn't bother with small talk. Just rested her forearms on the table and studied Eleanor's face. "You sent it, didn't you?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "An hour ago." Harper let out a breath, half exhale, half relief. "She'll explode." "She already is," Eleanor said, lifting her tea to her lips. Silently, from the inside out, they sat in the quiet for a moment, the air thick with what hadn't been said for years. Harper finally asked, "Is it official? Everything?" Eleanor reached beneath the table and pulled out a worn leather folder, elegant, scuffed at the edges, and held closed with a simple brass clasp. She slid it across to Harper with a steadiness that didn't tremble. Harper hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope, cream-colored, thick with contents. Across the front, in Eleanor's steady script. "For Harper, upon incapacity or death." Beneath it, a small bound packet labeled Statement of Intent and Trust Summary. Neatly typed, notarized, annotated. Harper's fingers brushed over the seal. "I wasn't sure I was allowed to hope," she whispered. Eleanor watched her carefully. "You were. You are. Then, Kimberly's really not in it." "At all?" "No," Eleanor said, voice flat but without cruelty. "Not as a beneficiary, not as power of attorney, not as executor." Harper exhaled again, but this time there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something tight and sad. "I didn't want to ask, but I hoped." Eleanor folded her hands together and let her gaze drop briefly to the steam rising from her tea. "I chose kindness over bloodline," she said softly. "That's not betrayal, it's logic." Harper looked up sharply at that. "You don't have to explain." "I do," Eleanor said. "Because one day, someone's going to tell you I was heartless, that I cut Kimberly out to punish her, that I left you everything because I was angry." She reached over and tapped the sealed envelope. "That's the truth. Every reason, every step, every piece of paper Paul and I signed. I want you to know I didn't act in rage. I acted in clarity." Harper's eyes welled before she could stop them. "You didn't have to give me any of this. I know." "I would have stayed," Harper said, voice shaking now. "Even if you'd left everything to her, I would have stayed, helped, taken care of things." "I know that too," Eleanor said. "That's why I did." The silence that followed was thick with love and history and the kind of pain you carry without speaking of it. For years, Harper had watched Kimberly treat Eleanor like a prop, smiling when George was around, undermining when he wasn't. She'd bitten her tongue, tried to make peace, stayed out of the crossfire, but now, with that envelope in front of her, something shifted. Something settled. "I'll protect it," Harper said, her voice clear. "All of it, I swear. I believe you." Harper reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand. Her grip was strong, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt the weight in her chest lift, not because the battle was over, but because the line in the sand had finally been drawn. Not in secret, not in silence, but in trust, in blood that wasn't shared, but chosen. By Tuesday morning, the house had that tense stillness Eleanor had come to recognize, the quiet before Kimberly decided to drop by, uninvited. Eleanor was in the kitchen, slicing grapefruit, when the garage door rumbled open. The slam of heels on tile followed, sharp as gunfire. Kimberly breezed in wearing a white wool coat and irritation like perfume. "There you are," she said. "I texted twice. You didn't answer." Eleanor glanced at the clock. "It's 9:30. I was having breakfast." Kimberly dropped her bag onto the counter, ignoring the grapefruit. "I just need you to Venmo me for that errand I ran last week. The pharmacy run? It was like $400 after tax." Eleanor didn't look up. "I thought your father reimbursed you." "He said to check with you." Kimberly crossed her arms. "It's not like you need the money." Eleanor laid the knife down gently, turned, and met her eyes. "Which," she said, calm as polished glass, "is why I keep it." The silence that followed stretched like taut thread. Kimberly blinked, then forced a tight laugh. "Cute. Real cute." She pulled her phone from her purse, tapping furiously. "Fine. I'll just move it from our joint account. You'll see the transfer. Eleanor turned back to her grapefruit. You'll find that account doesn't exist anymore. What? I closed it last month, Eleanor said, tone even, slicing clean through the fruit. Paul handled the paperwork. The knife clicked against the cutting board, steady, final. Kimberly stared at her. You closed it without telling me? It wasn't your account. You were a signatory, temporarily, for convenience. Kimberly's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. You can't just, I already did. The color rose high in Kimberly's cheeks. She snatched her bag and stormed out, muttering something about lawyers and elder manipulation. The garage door slammed again, rattling the spice jars in their rack. Eleanor exhaled slowly, the faintest tremor of adrenaline under her ribs. By that afternoon, Paul Jennings was on the phone. She tried logging into the joint savings, he said. His voice was calm, but Eleanor could hear the clipped edge underneath. Multiple attempts, wrong credentials. The system locked her out automatically. I expected as much, Eleanor said, pouring herself another cup of coffee. She also called the bank branch directly, he continued. Claimed she was verifying balances. They contacted me immediately per your standing fraud alert. I've added an additional freeze on new joint authorizations. Eleanor smiled faintly. Efficient, as always. Paul exhaled through the line. You're doing the right thing, Eleanor. I know it feels ugly, but she's escalating. George can't or won't rein her in, so you have to. She's not the first person to mistake my silence for weakness, Eleanor said. Paul hesitated, then added, George once told me this would happen. She froze, mid-stir. When? 3 years ago, Paul said quietly. He asked what happens to joint assets if Kimberly ever, his words, tests the fences. He wanted to be sure you'd have protection. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. He never told me. He wanted you to feel safe, not suspicious, Paul said. But he knew her patterns. He saw it coming. For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing. The only sound was the soft ticking of the kitchen clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, she said, Then he was right. The trouble he predicted has arrived. That night, she walked through the house slowly, each room dimly lit by the soft glow of lamps. Kimberly's laughter didn't echo here anymore, but the ghost of her entitlement lingered, the scent of her perfume in the guest room, her mug still in the dishwasher, a silk scarf left hanging on a chair like a flag of defiance. Eleanor gathered the scarf, folded it neatly, and placed it on the hallway table beside the unopened mail. The simple act felt like closure, or maybe preparation. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Paul. Bank confirmed. Attempts flagged as potential fraud. System secure. P.S. You were right to act early. Stay alert. She read it twice, then deleted it. Across the hallway, a shadow moved past the frosted glass of the front door. A pause. Then retreating footsteps down the porch stairs. Eleanor set her cup down slowly, then turned off every light in the house, one by one, until only her reflection remained in the kitchen window. She stared at it for a long time, not scared, not angry, just ready. It hit Eleanor's phone as a ping while she was folding laundry. The caption was dramatic, the image worse. A photo of a generic porch, definitely not Eleanor's, but the scarf tied around the rail looked familiar, too familiar. Some battles you can't see until you're bleeding from them. Family estrangement, Jacques caregiver, fatigue, inheritance isn't love. Beneath it, likes stacking up by the second. Mutual friends, garden club women, even a few of George's distant cousins who'd once shared holiday pies in Eleanor's kitchen, now commenting heart emojis and sending strength gifts. Eleanor stared at the screen in silence. Then she took a screenshot and sent it directly to Paul Jennings. Subject, defamation in progress. Documenting for legal file. No flourish, no context, just facts. Then she saved the image into her digital contingency folder. Renamed the file, K. Denton Social Post 10/18. Irene found her in the study 20 minutes later, the sound of the washer clicking off in the background. Eleanor seated at the desk with her laptop open, expression unreadable. She really did it, didn't she? Irene asked, holding a cup of tea in one hand and an unlit cigarette in the other, an old habit she'd long replaced with clenching something between her fingers. She posted it, Eleanor confirmed. Some vague poor me self-pity piece. No names, but just enough breadcrumbs. Playing martyr to people who don't even know the will's already closed on her, Irene muttered. Eleanor didn't look up. Let her perform. She clicked once more and dropped the image into a backup folder. I've already pulled the curtain, Paul called at 4:14 p.m. sharp. His voice was clipped but contained. I'm drafting a cease and desist, he said. We'll keep it surgical. No overreach, no emotion, just an unambiguous warning. The moment she attaches your name or Harper's to any public post, we file. I don't want to sue her, Eleanor said, staring out the window. I want her quiet. Then we make silence cost her, Paul replied. Sometimes people don't stop lying until the lie becomes expensive. She nodded slowly. Send me the draft. At 6:38 p.m., Harper messaged Kimberly directly. It wasn't a long message. It didn't match Kimberly's tone or tempo. It didn't shout, it didn't accuse. It simply said, maybe stop talking about people you depend on. Silence looks better than begging in disguise. Read receipt, 6:42 p.m. No reply, no scene. But Eleanor knew Kimberly had read it. The next hour was quiet online. The post was still up, but comments slowed. Kimberly didn't post again, not that night. Later, as Eleanor locked up the house, kitchen light off, front door bolted, she passed the scarf still tied outside. The knot had slipped slightly in the wind, one corner fluttering like a torn flag. She left it there, not as evidence, as warning. In bed, she propped a pillow behind her back and opened her laptop. The contingency folder blinked up at her. She opened the document labeled Sequence Options, Post-Mortem Notices, and reread the list. Paul's plan was watertight, every clause, every protection, every scenario accounted for. Eleanor had always been a quiet woman, not passive, not soft, just precise. And now her precision was the very thing Kimberly hadn't counted on. The morning was overcast, which suited Eleanor fine. It made the drive to Paul Jennings' office feel insulated. No sun, no glare, no drama. Just the quiet hum of the tires on asphalt and the soft creak of the leather steering wheel under her gloved hands. Paul greeted her with the same crisp efficiency he always did. The conference room was already prepared, clean wood table, 2 pens, a stack of documents aligned perfectly at the center, and a carafe of coffee Eleanor would politely decline. He sat across from her and opened the folder. This is the quitclaim deed, transferring ownership of the property to Harper, he said. It activates automatically upon your death or legal incapacity. Until then, you retain full control. Eleanor adjusted her reading glasses and nodded. And Kimberly? Paul shook his head. Not entitled to residence, sale, rental income, or contestation. She has no legal standing, not under this structure. We wrapped the deed in a trust instrument that covers taxes, utilities, and future maintenance for 15 years. All prepaid. There's nothing to dispute. Eleanor studied the document, though she already knew what it said. She'd read every draft, had questions answered, got second opinions. There were no holes left to fill. Paul tapped the table lightly. She can't contest what she was never promised. And she'll never hear it from me first, Eleanor replied, setting down her pen after signing the first 3 pages. There was no glee in her tone, no tremble either, just the clarity of a woman finishing what she had quietly prepared for a very long time. Back at the house, the dining table was cleared of centerpieces and candlesticks. Irene had laid out the final paperwork beside a notary seal, 2 pens, and a ceramic mug that read, "This too shall pass," in fading script. She handed Eleanor a glass of water and pulled her glasses from the collar of her blouse. "You sure?" Irene asked, flipping to the signature page. "I was sure when I asked Harper to sign the POA," Eleanor said. "This is just the last brick in the foundation." Irene chuckled lightly and pressed the seal. "It's a funny thing passing down a house to someone who actually wants to care for it." "She won't paint the cabinets turquoise," Eleanor murmured, "or talk about flipping it for a profit, or hold cocktail parties in the garden and call it charity. She'll live in it," Irene said, "like it's a home, not a trophy." They finished the stack in silence, initials in the margins, full names on the signature lines, the metal stamp of the notary seal echoing faintly off the kitchen tile. When it was done, Eleanor tucked the papers into the fireproof folder and slid it into the small safe hidden in the coat closet. It clicked shut with quiet finality. That night, she walked through the house slowly, barefoot, a glass of water in hand. The fireplace was out, but the warmth of the day lingered in the floorboards. In the guest room Kimberly had once claimed as her landing pad, Eleanor opened the closet. The hangers were empty now, save for one scarf, an expensive silk piece in deep navy and gold. Eleanor pulled it down, folded it in half, and set it neatly in the donation box by the door. On the dresser, she noticed an old hairbrush, Kimberly's, still with a few strands tangled in its bristles. She considered throwing it out, then changed her mind and dropped it in the same box. By morning, the room would be clean, anonymous, free. Over breakfast, Irene read the news, while Eleanor reviewed a spreadsheet Paul had sent. A monthly breakdown of the trust fund allocations tied to the house, property taxes, prepaid, water, gas, electric, all registered under the trust entity. Harper would never see a single bill she hadn't anticipated. "You've thought of everything," Irene said, glancing over the top of her paper. "I had time," Eleanor said. And a lot of silence. Irene stirred her tea. "She's going to come at you again, probably with crocodile tears this time." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She reached for her cup, took a sip, and looked out the window. A squirrel darted across the lawn, startled by its own shadow. "She'll learn what it feels like to scream into a void," Eleanor said quietly. "I've already stepped away from the fight." "And left the paperwork behind to win it for you," Irene added. Eleanor gave a small smile. "Exactly." By late afternoon, the house felt different. Not lighter exactly, but settled, no longer holding its breath. Eleanor dusted the mantel, rearranged a vase in the entryway, and took her time folding the linen napkins in the drawer. Small tasks, deliberate movements, a life built in steps, not performances. Harper called that evening, just to check in. Eleanor told her everything was signed. Harper didn't cry, but her voice caught once. "I won't let her twist this," she said softly. "You trusted me. I won't let it become ammunition." "I know you won't," Eleanor replied. "That's why it's yours." The cafe was one of those polished suburban places that pretended to be quaint. White brick walls, reclaimed wood tables, plants hanging from the ceiling like staged authenticity. Kimberly had chosen it, of course. Neutral ground, she'd called it in the text. Eleanor knew better. Kimberly didn't believe in neutral ground. Only territory she hadn't claimed yet. Delilah, one of Kimberly's friends from the garden club, was already seated when Eleanor arrived. Too much perfume, too many questions disguised as concern. Kimberly was at the table too, scrolling through her phone, the corner of her mouth tight. Eleanor took her time removing her gloves. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. "I didn't realize this was a group lunch." "Oh, it's not," Kimberly said, tucking her phone away. "Delilah just happened to be here. Isn't that right?" Delilah smiled with the kind of nervous politeness that comes from being caught in someone else's storm. "Completely random," she said, though her phone was already face down beside her mimosa. Eleanor ordered tea. Kimberly ordered wine. It wasn't even noon. At first, the conversation was brittle but civil. Updates about the Garden Society, comments about the weather, a short-lived discussion about Harper's new position at the hospital. But then Kimberly's tone shifted. It always did. "You know, Mom," she said too sweetly, "Harper's been helping you keep track of bills lately, hasn't she? That's good. Sometimes it's hard to keep up with things when, well, memory starts to go." Eleanor didn't flinch. "My memory is fine." "Oh, of course," Kimberly said, waving a hand. "I didn't mean anything by it. It's just, last week, you said you couldn't find your reading glasses, but they were on your head. Twice." Delilah made a small, uncomfortable sound. "We all misplace things," she offered. Kimberly ignored her. "Dad used to worry about that," she said, swirling her wine. "He said he thought you were, what was the phrase, showing signs, early cognitive decline." Eleanor's fingers tightened on her teacup, but her voice stayed steady. "George said a lot of things, most of them thoughtful. That wasn't one of them." Kimberly laughed, too loud, the kind of brittle noise that needed an audience. "Oh, come on, don't be defensive. We all age. Nothing shameful about it." The words hung there, soft, smiling, loaded. Eleanor set her cup down carefully. You didn't ask me here to talk about aging. Kimberly blinked, feigning surprise. I wanted to check on you. No, Eleanor said evenly. You wanted to see if I'd start unraveling in public. Kimberly's expression cracked for half a second, just enough for Delilah to see it. She shifted in her chair. I think I'll get this to go, Delilah said quietly, gathering her purse. But her phone remained on the table, screen still black, recording light blinking faintly in the corner. Neither Kimberly nor Eleanor noticed. Not yet. 10 minutes later, Kimberly leaned forward, lowering her voice. Let's not pretend, okay? You've had your fun with the paperwork, locking me out of accounts, freezing everything. But you won't be around forever, Eleanor. And when you're gone, everything resets. Everything becomes mine. She sat back, satisfied, mistaking Eleanor's silence for surrender. But Eleanor wasn't silent out of fear. She was cataloging. Every word, every tell, every betrayal dressed as inevitability. She reached for her purse, laid cash on the table, and said simply, I hope you enjoy the fantasy. Then she stood and left. Delilah stayed behind, the phone still running, her eyes darting between the empty doorway and Kimberly's flushed face. Delete that, Kimberly said sharply. Delilah hesitated. You shouldn't talk like that, Kim. Delete it. Delilah slipped the phone into her purse without answering. By evening, the audio file was in Eleanor's inbox. No subject line, no note, just the recording. 43 seconds of Kimberly laughing between sips of wine and saying clear as glass. She'll be gone soon, and everything becomes mine. Paul received it within the hour. He called immediately. You didn't record this? No, Eleanor said. Someone else did. Then it's admissible, Paul said, voice cool and deliberate. I'll add it to the trust file, along with the social posts, along with everything else. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. Doesn't sound like dementia to me. Paul's chuckle was low. No, it sounds like a woman with all her faculties intact, and a documented heir threatening her. That's a gift, Eleanor. A legal one. Irene stopped by later that night, bringing soup neither of them really wanted. The recording was still open on Eleanor's laptop, the waveform frozen mid-laugh. Irene listened once, then twice, then shook her head slowly. She doesn't know she's testifying against herself. She never does, Eleanor said. Kimberly's too loud to hear her own words. They sat in the kitchen for a long time after that. The soup went cold, the house quiet around them. Somewhere in the background, the fridge hummed, steady and calm. Eleanor reached over and closed the laptop. She wanted a story, she said. Now she's in one. Just not the kind she gets to narrate. Kimberly found the letter in her mailbox on a Thursday afternoon, wedged between a coupon book and a glossy alumni magazine she never opened. The envelope was white, unmarked except for her name in typed black letters. No return address, no stamp. The kind of envelope that doesn't ask, it announces. Inside, 3 paragraphs, 4 sentences that undid months of pretending. Kimberly Denton, you are not entitled to any real property, financial assets, or posthumous claims against the estate of Eleanor Fairchild. Any further harassment, defamation, or misrepresentation, public or private, will result in immediate legal action. This letter will serve as formal warning and documentation. At the bottom, Paul Jennings' signature. Beneath it, Jennings and Ashcroft LLP, watermark embossed in faint gray. Kimberly's fingers curled tight around the page, her cheeks flushed hot. Her breath caught like it had somewhere to go, but no exit. She didn't sit down. She didn't reread it. She called. Eleanor was slicing apples in the kitchen when her phone buzzed. Incoming call, Kimberly. She let it ring twice, then picked up. Eleanor Fairchild. What the hell is this? Kimberly's voice snapped through the speaker. Are you serious? A legal threat? You're threatening your own family. I'm documenting this call, Eleanor said calmly, placing the last apple slice into a bowl, and all future contact. You're insane, Kimberly hissed. This is elder abuse. You've been manipulated. I'm going to file a complaint. You're not even of sound mind. Goodbye, Kimberly. Don't you dare hang up on... Click. Eleanor pressed the red button, wiped her hands on a towel, and turned back to her fruit. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees. The quiet afterward felt earned. 3 hours later, the post went up. Kimberly, silhouetted in soft lighting, seated at a piano she hadn't played since college. A half-drunk glass of red wine sat artfully beside a framed photo of her and George. The caption read, "When parents weaponize money, families die. Not everyone has the luxury of being born into kindness. Some of us have to survive it. Inheritance war, daughter not disposable, love isn't legal." It took 37 minutes to hit 200 likes. Eleanor saw it from Harper's forwarded screenshot. No words, just the image, the caption, and the timestamp. She read it once, then pressed Save to Evidence folder. Paul called that night, his voice taut but composed. "I saw the post. She doesn't mention me by name. She doesn't have to anymore," he said. "Pattern, intent, timing. It's all admissible when it builds a case. Especially if she's trying to frame herself as the injured party after being notified legally. She's not just trying," Eleanor said. "She's rehearsing it." Paul exhaled through the phone. "I'll draft a final response. One more letter, then we stop responding unless she involves the court." Eleanor nodded slowly, more to herself than the line. "Make it clear, no ambiguity." "It will be brutal, polite, but brutal." "Exactly." Irene was quiet when Eleanor told her. She stirred her tea, took a slow sip, and finally said, "She's not unraveling. She's doubling down." "She doesn't know how not to perform," Eleanor replied, "even when the curtain's already fallen. She thinks the audience will save her, or pity her." Irene looked up. "You worried?" "No," Eleanor said, folding the dish towel neatly over the edge of the sink. "I've made sure the ending is already written." The next morning, Eleanor received a package by courier. Inside, a hard copy of Kimberly's social post, printed and notarized. Paul's final letter clipped to the front, sealed in an official envelope. Clean, final, dispassionate. It began, "Ms. Denton, your public insinuations are noted and archived. No future dialogue will be entertained. You are no longer protected by assumption." Eleanor didn't need to read the rest. She slid the letter into her file drawer, closed it gently, and returned to her coffee. Some people fought wars with fire. She'd chosen paper, and paper, she knew, didn't just cut. It lasted. It started with a single comment. Just a line, tucked under Kimberly's latest post. Another gauzy photo filtered in gold, her hand clutching a wine glass, like a prop. The caption vague enough to sound profound. "When you grow up with manipulation, your survival becomes the thing they call rebellion." Cycle breakers. Empath energy. Estranged but healing. The comment wasn't long. It didn't yell, didn't accuse. It simply stated what no one else had dared to say out loud. Harper Fairchild. "My grandma paid for your wedding, your car, your house deposit. Don't rewrite history just because the truth no longer flatters you." 96 likes in under an hour. Eleanor saw it, of course. Harper had texted her the screenshot. No commentary included. She never responded to these things immediately. That wasn't her rhythm. She sipped her tea, she folded her linens, and she let the internet do what it always did to lies eventually. It turned. By midday, quiet ripples were spreading. Kimberly's list of mutuals started shrinking, slowly at first, like leaves falling before a storm. One of the women from the Garden Society, Carol Withers, unfriended her outright. Then Diana Bloom, who had once invited Kimberly to co-chair the library fundraiser, removed 3 old photos of them from her feed. No fights, no open call-outs, just digital distance, quiet refusals. The kind Kimberly couldn't spin into victimhood because they came without warning or explanation, she noticed. Quickly, Harper noticed too. "It wasn't even harsh," she told Eleanor over the phone that night. "It was just the truth, and they all saw it." "You didn't say it to convince her," Eleanor said gently. "You said it so you didn't have to carry it anymore." Harper went quiet for a moment. "I just wanted people to know she's rewriting things that never belonged to her." "They know now," Eleanor replied. "And you did it without shouting." Later that evening, Eleanor sat in the den, the lights low, a quilt folded over her lap, as Irene read aloud from her crossword. 10 letters, starts with D, ends in E. A word for collapse, masked as elegance. Eleanor sipped her tea. Deference? Good guess, but no, too generous. A buzz came from Eleanor's phone on the side table. Harper again. One line this time. She deleted the post. Eleanor read it twice. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just let the moment settle. She used her voice, Irene said softly, folding the paper. You used your silence. She looked over, eyebrows raised. Guess who won? Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't have to. Kimberly sat alone that night on her balcony, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and her laptop open in front of her. The post was gone, not archived, not hidden, deleted. And with it, the only version of the story that had painted her as the victim. The silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was exposing. She checked her followers, down by 17. She opened her message requests. Nothing but white space. She opened her email. Nothing new, not even spam. For the first time in months, the world didn't rush to her defense. It didn't even seem to notice. The next day, Eleanor clipped roses from the side yard. Sharp shears, steady hands. She arranged them into a vase and set them near the window, the morning sun lighting up their edges like flame. Irene came by with blueberry scones. She caught sight of the flowers and raised a brow. Celebrating something? No, Eleanor said. Just enjoying what's already mine. They ate in the quiet comfort of people who didn't need to explain the power of restraint. Meanwhile, the internet kept doing what it did best. Moving on, the likes faded. The hashtags lost traction. The carefully filtered sob stories were replaced by someone's engagement photos, someone's rescue dog, someone's vacation video from Maui. But Kimberly noticed the silence. And this time, the silence wasn't Eleanor's. It was everyone else's. The email arrived quietly. Subject line, request for interview, estate planning and elder protections. Sender, Grace Nyland, local matters. Weakly, Eleanor read it 3 times before forwarding it to Paul with a simple note, declining the interview. But I'm willing to share anonymous trust data if helpful to others. She didn't expect a reply from the reporter, but one came, gracious, short, and to the point. Thank you for what you're doing. Even if you're not ready to talk, your clarity is helping more people than you know. Eleanor said nothing aloud, but a breath left her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been holding. A week later, the story ran in Local Matters Weekly under the title, When Silence Becomes a Shield, Quiet Trends in Elder-Directed Trusts. The article didn't name her, it didn't mention Kimberly, it didn't need to. It focused on estate planning trends among older women, those who had experienced betrayal not in dramatic court battles, but in dinner table digs, passive-aggressive messages, and entitlement dressed as affection. Buried midway down the column was a single pull quote. Cutting someone out isn't cruelty, it's clarity. The words weren't attributed, but those who knew, knew. Paul called that evening, voice unusually warm. We've had 6 new inquiries this week, people wanting to set up the same layered trust model you did. Quiet legacies, no drama. I'm glad, Eleanor said. You know, you may have started something. No, she said softly. I just stopped something. In Harper's ethics seminar, the topic that week was autonomy versus obligation. The professor posed a question about whether aging parents had a duty to split inheritance equally among children, regardless of behavior. Harper didn't raise her hand in class, but she went home and wrote. It wasn't long, just 600 words. Titled, The Cost of Entitlement, What One Woman Taught Me About Boundaries, Inheritance, and Love. She submitted it quietly. The next morning, her professor asked her to stay after class. Your story, he said, lowering his voice, was honest, unapologetic, and brave. I think I know who it's about, but I don't need confirmation. Harper swallowed. She doesn't even know I wrote it. You should tell her. That night, Harper sat with Eleanor on the porch, both of them bundled in fleece against the early evening chill. The sun dipped behind the bare oak trees, casting the lawn in soft gold. I wrote about you, Harper said. Eleanor turned to her, curious but not alarmed. For class, Harper added. It wasn't personal petty, it was personal true. Eleanor nodded once. Good, Harper hesitated. I said that sometimes, love is protecting what's left of yourself when someone demands more than they've earned. Eleanor's hand resting on the armrest gently squeezed Harper's. "You didn't write about me," she said. "You wrote about yourself." And that made her prouder than anything else. The following week, a thick envelope arrived from the County Council's Office of Aging Initiatives. Inside was a small certificate on parchment-like cardstock, bordered in deep blue. The title read, "Community Recognition for Personal Contribution to Elder Financial Literacy." Below that, a line in fine print, "In appreciation of your voluntary contributions to local education efforts on estate integrity and financial safeguarding." Eleanor stared at it for a long time. Then she tucked it into the drawer with Harper's power of attorney, the trust documents, and her living will. Not framed, not flaunted, just kept. When she told Irene, the reaction was simple and perfect. "They finally gave you something," Irene said, sipping her coffee. "And it wasn't money or flowers or applause." "No," Eleanor said, a quiet smile forming. "It was credit." "Deserved credit," Irene corrected. "A legacy, whether you asked for it or not." They sat in the kitchen, the sunlight pooling across the tile floor. Outside, the wind stirred the garden beds, where spring bulbs had already begun pushing through the soil. Right. Kimberly didn't post that week, or the week after. The silence didn't feel victorious. It felt accurate. For once. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Eleanor was trimming the wisteria back from the porch rail when her phone buzzed against the wood ledge. Unknown number, local area code. She answered anyway. "Mrs. Fairchild, this is Dr. Brody's office at St. Augustine's. We're calling to confirm a change in medical record access. Someone attempted to log in using your information, Kimberly Denton." Eleanor's pruning shears paused midair. "Yes," she said evenly. "That sounds right." "She listed herself as your secondary medical proxy. Our system flagged the entry because your power of attorney file shows a joint assignment to Harper Fairchild and Paul Jennings." "That's correct," Eleanor said. "It was filed 6 months ago. Then we'll lock her access immediately. Any updates to your chart will be restricted to your assigned representatives only." "Thank you," Eleanor said, setting the shears down carefully. "That's the right decision." The nurse hesitated before hanging up. "She seemed surprised. Said she was your family." Eleanor's voice didn't change. "She's mistaken." That afternoon, Paul called from his office. He'd already been notified through the system's legal liaison. "I've added the incident to the estate log," he said. "Unauthorized medical inquiry, date and time stamped. It's airtight." "I don't want to humiliate her," Eleanor said, though her tone carried no warmth. "I just want her out of my records." "She is, permanently." He paused, then added, "You handled that call well." Eleanor almost smiled. It's amazing what clarity can do for one's blood pressure. Kimberly's text to Harper arrived that evening, heavy with punctuation and the kind of false emotion that read more like performance than pain. "Kimberly, how could you? You changed everything. You and him. She's your grandmother. I'm her daughter. You had no right." It took Harper half an hour to reply. She stared at the message, reread it twice, then typed, "Harper, you called her a burden. She carried you. No emojis, no follow-up, no attempt to explain." She set the phone face down on her desk, took a deep breath, and went back to her notes for class. At St. Augustine's, the digital locks updated overnight. Kimberly tried to log in again just before dawn, her credentials flagged as unauthorized third party. She refreshed the page twice, then 3 times. Then slammed the laptop shut. The denial message was still glowing on the screen when she stormed into her living room, muttering under her breath. She wasn't losing access. She was being erased. The next day, Eleanor sat in the waiting room of her doctor's office for her routine blood work. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above. A young couple whispered near the vending machine, a toddler banging her heels against a chair 2 rows away. When the receptionist called her name, Eleanor smiled. "I just need to confirm my file notes," she said. The receptionist scrolled through the screen. "Everything looks current. Primary, Harper Fairchild. Secondary, Paul Jennings. You're set." "And no one else?" Eleanor asked. The woman glanced up, polite but puzzled. "No one else." "Good," Eleanor said simply. Paul's logbook grew another entry that evening. Written in his precise block handwriting, October 17th. Unauthorized PHI access attempt by K. Denton. Notification issued and privileges terminated per client confirmation. He added a small notation in the margin. Maintain record indefinitely. He didn't need to explain why. Some boundaries weren't defensive. They were declarations. Later that night, Irene sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, shelling walnuts into a glass bowl while Eleanor sorted mail. The rhythmic crack and clink filled the room like an old song. So, Irene said finally, they locked her out. Yes. Feels fitting. She wanted control of everything that wasn't hers. Eleanor folded a flyer neatly in half. And now she can't even open a portal. Irene smirked. Poetic justice with a login screen. Something like that, they both chuckled, though quietly. It wasn't triumph they felt, just balance, restored inch by inch. Harper stopped by after dinner, dropping her backpack by the door. I saw her try to call again, she said. Eleanor raised a brow. You didn't answer, I hope. Of course not, I'm not a lifeline. No, Eleanor said. You're the anchor. Harper smiled faintly at that. Paul said he's keeping everything documented. Every attempt, every message. Good, paper indoors. Outside, the wind pressed gently against the windows, autumn leaves sweeping the porch like whispers of the season ending exactly when it should. Eleanor set her mug down, feeling the steady hum of quiet resolve in her chest. The documents, the deeds, the access. All of it, the tangible proof of boundaries finally respected. And somewhere across town, Kimberly was discovering what silence really felt like when every door she'd forced open had finally learned to lock itself. It was just after dusk when the knock came. 3 taps, measured, hesitant, but loud enough to echo through the hallway. Eleanor had been sitting in the den with a book she wasn't really reading, the words swimming quietly in the lamplight. She knew that rhythm. It wasn't a stranger's knock. It was one practiced by someone who still believed their name carried permission. She didn't move. The house held its breath with her. The next knock came sharper, then again, impatient, insistent. Through the thin glass of the sidelights, Eleanor saw the faint blur of a figure leaning forward, peering toward the porch camera. When she finally stood, it wasn't curiosity that guided her. It was confirmation. She crossed to the door and looked through the peephole. Kimberly, wrapped in a dark coat, hair messy, one hand clutching the edge of the door frame like she owned even that sliver of space. Her mouth moved, but the glass muffled everything. The porch light threw a halo around her, but the rest of the night pressed close. Eleanor didn't unlock anything, didn't even touch the knob. She simply watched for a moment. The rise and fall of Kimberly's shoulders, the faint tremor of someone who'd rehearsed their apology but hadn't earned the right to speak it aloud. Then she stepped back. Kimberly knocked again, louder this time. The sound was hollow, almost frantic. Then silence, then the rustle of paper. Eleanor waited, listening to the faint scratch of a pen against a notepad. A minute later, something slid under the door, a folded sheet, cream stationery, her name written across it. We were family once. No plea, no signature, just that single sentence, written in Kimberly's looping, unsteady handwriting. Eleanor stood over it for a long moment, the weight of years pressing into that small, motionless space between them. She could smell the faint trace of Kimberly's perfume on the paper, sharp, familiar, and somehow already fading. She bent, picked it up, and carried it down the hall to her study. The shredder hummed to life beneath the desk, a low mechanical purr that filled the quiet. She fed the note through slowly, line by line, watching the words disappear into ribbons that curled like smoke before falling into the bin. When the last scrap vanished, she switched off the shredder and rested her hand on the cool plastic top. The house exhaled again, and for the first time in months, the air felt light. Later, Irene came by with a thermos of soup and the kind of expression that meant she already knew. She showed up, Irene asked, pouring the soup into bowls without waiting for an answer. Eleanor nodded once. She knocked. And I didn't answer. Irene studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, You didn't shut the door, you just stopped opening it. Eleanor looked down at her spoon, then back up with the faintest trace of a smile. That's the difference between punishment and peace. They ate in silence, the clock ticking softly above the stove, the soup steaming gently between them. Outside, the wind brushed the eaves like fingertips searching for a way in. When they finished, Irene gathered the dishes and said, "I'll tell Paul she tried again." "Already handled," Eleanor said, glancing toward her desk. "He's filing the final no-contact advisory tonight. After that, any attempt to reach me, digital, physical, or otherwise, becomes a matter for his office." "Clean finish," Irene said, drying her hands. "Just like you like it." "No," Eleanor said softly, "just like it needed to be." Across town, in the dim light of her small apartment, Kimberly sat staring at her phone, the message thread with Harper open and unsent replies stacking like ghosts. She hadn't meant to knock so hard. She hadn't meant to sound angry, but the silence had done what no argument ever could. It turned her reflection into evidence. She scrolled through her contacts, stopped on Mom, then back to Eleanor. Then closed the phone. On her kitchen counter sat a returned envelope, postmarked from Jennings and Ashcroft. Final notice, contact restrictions enforced. She turned it over once, then twice, then dropped it into the trash. The next morning, Eleanor watered the houseplants in the soft light that spilled across her kitchen. The coffee pot hissed quietly. On the porch, the faint outline of footprints had already faded with the dew. The house was still, whole, hers. She looked toward the door. No guilt, no ache, just certainty. Some endings, she thought, don't require closing chapters. They just stop being written. Kimberly left town in the middle of February. No goodbye, no social media post, no flurry of boxes tied with sentimental captions. Just an abrupt silence. No more check-ins, no more confrontations, no more knocks on Eleanor's door. Her landlord found the keys taped to the inside of the mailbox. Her apartment half cleaned. The closet mostly empty, the walls scuffed and bare. She didn't leave a forwarding address. Not even the mail carrier noticed she was gone until the third week. 6 months later, a manila envelope arrived at Jennings and Ashcroft, postmarked from North Carolina. Inside, divorce papers. Filed by Nick Denton. Irreconcilable differences. No children, no shared assets, no known location of the respondent. Paul forwarded the update to Eleanor without commentary. Just a single line in his usual clean formatting. Client of interest has formally been disjoined from legal spouse. Logbook updated. Eleanor didn't reply. She didn't need to. The world had done what it always did when pressure met resistance. It corrected itself. Slowly, then all at once. Harper, meanwhile, had bloomed. By May, she'd landed a competitive summer internship at the County Legal Aid Society. In June, a scholarship offer followed. Fully funded, anonymous donor. Harper didn't know who it came from, but Eleanor did. She'd been quietly funding the foundation for 3 years, ever since Paul suggested a way to funnel part of her estate's capital gains toward selective empowerment. It was never written in Harper's name, but it always had her in mind. Eleanor returned to teaching in September, just 1 night a week, in a sunlit room at the community center where the chairs still creaked and the water cooler still whined. Financial clarity for late bloomers, the flyer said. She designed the syllabus herself. The students were older, some recently retired, some recently widowed. Some just tired of pretending they understood how to protect what they'd earned. On the second night of class, a woman named Celia raised her hand and said, "How do you know when it's time to cut someone off?" Eleanor didn't blink. "You already know," she said softly. "You're just waiting for permission." That night, Eleanor and Irene sat on the back porch with a bottle of dry red wine and the quiet rustle of wind moving through the trees. "She's really gone then," Irene said. "She left herself nowhere else to go," Eleanor replied. "I saw Nick at the co-op," Irene added. "He looked tired. Said they hadn't spoken since she vanished. He was mailing papers. Didn't even sound angry. Just done." Eleanor tipped her glass toward the stars. Sometimes a lesson doesn't stick until you realize the teacher's left the room. Irene laughed into her drink. "You gave her a lesson." "She refused to learn." "But the grade stuck," Eleanor said. In Harper's apartment, a framed copy of her scholarship letter hung next to a small handwritten note Eleanor had once left in her backpack. "Love isn't what we owe, it's what we protect." It wasn't the kind of phrase you embroidered on a pillow. but Harper read it every morning anyway. In October, the first leaf fall came early. Eleanor walked the garden paths with a small rake, gathering the red gold scatterings into neat lines that curved like punctuation around her flower beds. Her knees ached a little more than they used to, but her breath was even, her steps were steady. Inside, the kettle whistled. On the table sat her teaching folder, a thank you card from a student, and a note from Paul confirming all financial affairs were current and protected. Nothing out of place, no one left unaccounted for. By Thanksgiving, Eleanor had stopped checking the mail for surprises. The only envelopes now came with stamps and kindness. On the first snow of December, Harper drove home with 2 pies and good news. She'd been offered an extension at legal aid through winter break. Eleanor didn't ask who she'd beaten out. She didn't need to. "I'll still be home in time for Christmas," Harper said, pulling off her gloves. "I promised the porch would get lights this year." Eleanor smiled. "Then it will." Across state lines, Kimberly lived in a small motel with monthly rates and flickering hallway lights. She no longer posted. No one messaged. The screen that once reflected her curated life now only offered headlines she didn't click. She worked mornings in retail, nights cleaning offices. No one in the new town knew her name. And that perhaps was the last thing she'd never meant to lose. The morning air smelled of damp soil and lemon thyme. Eleanor stepped onto the garden path with a gentle exhale, pulling her sweater close. The frost had just begun lifting from the grass, the sunlight catching on the tips like dusted sugar. She walked slowly, not out of need, but reverence. Her hands skimmed the heads of dried hydrangeas and the golden remains of autumn roses. There was no rush now, no clock to answer to, no weight on her chest that didn't belong there. For the first time in a very long time, Eleanor wasn't bracing for the next thing. She was simply here. By noon, Harper arrived with 2 paper cups of tea and a manila envelope tucked under her arm. She didn't knock, just let herself in the back door like she always had. "You okay with peppermint today?" she asked, placing the cups down. Eleanor smiled. "Better than okay." Harper held up the envelope. "My final ethics essay. Professor asked if he could use it as an anonymous reading in next year's class." Eleanor raised a brow. "And what did you say?" "I said yes, because some lessons don't belong to just us." Eleanor took the envelope and opened it carefully. The pages were still warm from the printer. The title sat at the top in bold, simple font. "The Cost of Entitlement. What I Didn't Inherit." She read in silence, the steam from her tea curling upward between paragraphs. Harper didn't interrupt. She just sat across from her, patient and still. By the final line, Eleanor's eyes welled, but she said nothing. The sentence hovered. "I didn't inherit money, I inherited clarity." She closed the packet slowly and placed her hand over it. "You didn't write that for them," she said. Harper nodded. "No. I wrote it for the version of me who once thought loyalty was the same as love." Eleanor reached across the table and rested her fingers lightly on Harper's. "You were always wiser than you knew." At 3:42 p.m., Paul's name lit up Eleanor's email inbox. The subject line was simple: "Estate finalized." She opened the message. All filings closed. Deed holds, trusts secure. Medical proxies reaffirmed. No outstanding claims or challenges. Everything you built is exactly where you intended it to be. It's done. Paul. She sat back in her chair, hand resting on the mousepad, letting the weight of finality settle, not heavy, not hollow, just real. A clean end. A complete one. That weekend, Irene insisted on brunch. No excuses. She arrived with a bottle of Prosecco, 2 mason jars of pear preserves, and a framed print that read, "People always learn the hard way, if you let them." They toasted over eggs and rosemary potatoes. "To the burden she'll never carry again," Irene said, raising her glass. Eleanor clinked hers gently. "To the people who thought I was one." They ate in the sunlit kitchen. No ghosts at the table, no shadows in the corners. Just the soft click of forks on plates, and the occasional murmur of wind against the window panes. When Harper arrived later with her suitcase for the winter holiday, the porch light was already strung in quiet, golden loops. Eleanor stepped out to greet her, arms already open. You remembered the lights, she said. Harper smiled. You remembered how to rest. They stood like that for a long time. No performance, no apology. Just the warmth of what had been chosen and the peace of what had been let go. Across state lines, in a town where her name meant nothing, Kimberly scanned groceries at a corner store. She no longer wore heels. Her hands were dry from cleaning chemicals. Her phone stayed on silent now, the screen mostly blank. The world hadn't punished her. It had simply moved on. Eleanor finished Harper's essay that night for the second time, reading it slower this round. The heater clicked on as she reached the last page, and she paused before closing the folder. Then, without hesitation, she opened her own journal and began to write. Not a letter, not a will, just a reflection. My daughter told her friends I was a burden she couldn't wait to get rid of. 2 weeks later, she found out she was the one I'd already written out. Eleanor put the pen down, closed the journal, and turned off the light. No anger, no sadness. Just the kind of silence that only comes from surviving someone else's noise.